The room was filled with the soft hum of Owen's keyboard. His fingers danced mechanically across the keys, their rhythm unchanging, like the ticking of a distant clock. Lily sat across the table, sketchpad in hand, pretending to work on a new design. In reality, she had been staring at the same blank page for 20 minutes. The silence in their apartment was oppressive, yet Owen seemed oblivious, cocooned in the glow of his computer screen. "Did you see the email I forwarded?" Lily finally asked, her voice tight with forced casualness. Owen didn't even glance her way. "No, I'll check later," he murmured, his gaze locked on his monitor. Later. It was always later. Lily bit her lip, her nails digging into the soft cover of her sketchpad. She couldn't remember the last time they had a real conversation. Sure, they talked about groceries, bills, and schedules, but it all felt transactional, devoid of the spark that once lit up their lives. She closed her sketchpad with a loud snap, the sound cutting through the monotony. Owen didn't flinch. The lack of reaction stunned more than if he had snapped back. Once, this would have been the moment he'd glance over with his lopsided smile and tease her about her dramatic flair. Now, there was only the faint glow of his screen reflected in his glasses. Later that evening, Lily found herself scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with mindless precision. She paused on a picture of a couple she knew, a former coworker and his fiancée, smiling on a sun-drenched beach. The caption read, "Still my favorite adventure buddy." Her chest tightened. When had Owen stopped calling her his adventure buddy? Or anything, for that matter? The pet names, the spontaneous kisses, the laughter, all of it seemed like a distant memory buried under years of routines and indifference. She glanced at Owen, who was now sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his own phone. "Do you want to watch something together?" she asked, her voice barely masking the hope she felt. He shrugged. "You can pick." Frustration bubbled beneath her skin. "I don't want to just pick something, Owen. I want us to choose together." He finally looked up, his brow furrowing slightly, as if she were speaking a foreign language. "Okay, then you choose, and I'll just watch," he replied, as though that settled it. Then his eyes flicked back to his phone. Lily stared at him, her nails digging into her palm. She felt invisible. The next morning, the tension finally erupted. It started small, an argument over coffee mugs. Owen had forgotten to rinse his, leaving it with a stubborn ring of dried espresso. Lily snapped, her voice sharp and cutting. It wasn't about the mug. It was about every ignored word, every missed connection, every moment she felt like a ghost in her own marriage. "You never listened to me, Owen," she shouted, her voice trembling with suppressed tears. He stood there, stunned, his mug still in his hand. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I listen." "No, you don't. You hear me, but you don't listen. It's like I don't even exist to you anymore." His expression hardened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" she scoffed. "What's not fair is feeling like I'm living with a stranger. You used to care, Owen. About me, about us. What happened?" For a moment, his face softened, a flicker of guilt passing through his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone. "I don't know what you want from me, Lily. I'm doing my best. That's the problem. Your best feels like nothing." That night, as Lily lay awake in bed, Owen's quiet snores filling the room, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Was this it? Was this all their marriage had become? She thought of the vibrant, passionate man she had married, the one who used to surprise her with handwritten notes and midnight ice cream runs. Where had he gone? Or maybe the better question was, where had they gone? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking her reverie. It was a text from Claire, her closest friend. "Are you okay? You seemed off earlier." Lily hesitated before typing back, "I don't know. I feel lost." Claire's response came almost immediately, "Come over tomorrow." We'll talk. Lily sighed, clutching her phone to her chest. Maybe tomorrow, she thought. Maybe tomorrow, she'd find a way to feel whole again. Lily's eyes flicked up from her desk, catching the flicker of movement as Daniel walked past. He flashed her a grin, easy, confident, and just a little too familiar. It was the kind of smile that used to make her stomach flip when it came from Owen. Now, Owen's smiles were rare, more like polite acknowledgments than expressions of warmth. She leaned back in her chair, letting the thought linger. If Owen wouldn't see her, maybe someone else would. And if he wouldn't fight for her, perhaps she could spark a reaction another way. The idea was reckless, but it thrilled her. That evening, she leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Owen. He was stirring a pot of spaghetti, his attention firmly fixed on the swirling sauce. Daniel asked me to help him with his presentation today, she said, trying to keep her tone light. He said I have a way of making things more dynamic. That's nice, Owen murmured, not looking up. Lily felt her jaw tighten. That's nice. It had become his default response to everything she said, a phrase so devoid of meaning it might as well have been static. She took a deep breath, determined to keep pushing. He said he couldn't have done it without me, she added, her voice tinged with a challenge. He even called me his secret weapon. This time, Owen glanced up, his brow furrowed slightly. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something, jealousy, irritation, anything, but then it was gone, replaced by his usual calm. That's good, he said, turning back to the stove. I'm glad your team appreciates you. Lily's stomach churned with frustration. It wasn't supposed to go like this. He was supposed to bristle, to say something cutting, to care. Instead, she was met with the same maddening indifference that had suffocated her for months. At work, Daniel became her unwitting accomplice. His easy charm and flirtatious banter were intoxicating, not because she wanted him, but because he made her feel visible. She leaned into it, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm during conversations, letting her eyes linger just a little too long. One afternoon, during a team brainstorming session, Daniel leaned close to her, his voice low. You're wasted here, you know that? You should be running the whole department. Lily laughed, the sound carrying across the room. Careful, Daniel. Flattery will get you everywhere. His grin widened, and for a moment, she felt a pang of guilt. But the thought of Owen, his blank expression, his endless focus on his laptop, quickly snuffed it out. That evening, Lily made a point to mention Daniel again, weaving him into the conversation like a loose thread begging to be pulled. He sent me the sweetest email today, she said, casually, scrolling through her phone at the dinner table. Said my ideas were the best part of the meeting. That's great, Owen replied, not looking up from his plate. Her fingers tightened around her fork. It's just nice to feel appreciated, you know? To have someone notice when you're doing a good job. Owen's head finally lifted, his eyes meeting hers. I appreciate you, he said, his tone matter of fact. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The next week, at an after-work happy hour, Lily let herself drift closer to Daniel. The bar was loud, filled with the buzz of conversation and laughter, but she was acutely aware of his presence beside her. You look amazing tonight, he said, his eyes sweeping over her. That color suits you. Lily smiled, tilting her head. You're too kind. Not kind, he said, leaning in slightly. Honest. Her heart raced, but not because of Daniel. It was the thought of Owen, sitting at home, oblivious. What would he do if he saw this? Would he even care? The idea both thrilled and infuriated her. Daniel lifted his phone, snapping a selfie of the two of them laughing. Proof we're the coolest people here, he joked. When he sent it to the group chat later, Lily made sure Owen saw it. She even went as far as leaving her phone on the counter, the photo conveniently displayed. When Owen glanced at it, she felt her pulse quicken. He studied the screen for a moment, his expression unreadable, before setting the phone down. "Looks like you had fun," he said simply, his voice neutral. Lily's chest tightened. "That's all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his tone calm. "It's a nice picture." Her frustration boiled over. "Do you even care?" she snapped, her voice rising. "About me, about us, about anything?" Owen blinked, clearly startled. "Of course I care." "Then show it," she shouted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Because all I see is a man who's more interested in his laptop than his wife." For a moment, silence hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Owen stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "I don't know what you want from me, Lily," he said quietly. "But I can't play this game with you." And just like that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the kitchen, her chest heaving with unshed tears. The next morning, Lily sat in her car outside the office, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She felt hollow, like a balloon that had been slowly deflated. The memory of Owen's words played in her mind on a loop, each one cutting deeper than the last. When Daniel knocked on her window, she startled, quickly wiping at her eyes. "Hey," he said, leaning down to peer inside. "You okay?" She forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah. Just thinking." "Well, stop thinking," he said with a grin. "Come inside. We've got a big day ahead." She followed him into the building, her smile firmly in place. But inside, she was unraveling. The game she had started to provoke Owen had backfired spectacularly, leaving her more alone than ever. And the worst part? She wasn't sure if there was any way to fix it. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Lily adjusted her scarf and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her makeup was perfect, subtle but striking, and her red lipstick added a bold touch of confidence. It wasn't every day she got invited to dinner with Justin, her creative director. The excuse had come easily to her lips, a work meeting with colleagues. It was partially true, but only partially. Owen had barely glanced at her when she left, muttering something about working late himself. It was the perfect cover, but the lie still felt heavy, an uncomfortable weight that pressed against her chest as she drove to the restaurant. Justin was already seated when she arrived, his tailored suit immaculate and his signature smirk firmly in place. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with an air of practiced charm. "Lily," he said warmly, his voice smooth and low. "You look fantastic." "Thank you," she replied, sliding into the chair. "I'm glad we could do this." As she settled in, the restaurant's ambience enveloped her. Soft lighting, quiet conversations, and the occasional clink of glasses made it feel intimate, too intimate. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself this was about work. Or so she told herself. The conversation flowed easily. They started with shop talk, upcoming campaigns, new clients, and Justin's vision for the next quarter. But as the evening progressed, the tone shifted. Justin was charismatic, weaving humor and personal anecdotes into their discussion, and Lily found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. "You know," Justin said, swirling his wine, "I've always thought you were underutilized at the company." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Underutilized?" He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're brilliant, Lily. Your work speaks for itself, but I don't think everyone sees it. You deserve more recognition." Her cheeks flushed, a mix of pride and discomfort. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "It's the truth." The way he looked at her made her pulse quicken. It wasn't like Daniel's playful flirting or the hollow indifference she felt from Owen. Justin's attention felt deliberate, calculated, and for a moment, it made her feel powerful. Midway through the dinner, Justin excused himself to take a call, leaving Lily alone with her thoughts. She glanced at her phone, debating whether to text Owen. She hadn't heard from him all evening, but she wasn't surprised. He rarely texted her first anymore. Instead, she opened her camera app, snapping a quick picture of the table, her untouched glass of wine, the soft glow of candlelight. She didn't send it to anyone, but the act of taking it felt like a quiet rebellion. When Justin returned, he placed his hand on the back of her chair as he sat down, his fingers brushing her shoulder lightly. The gesture was casual but charged, sending a shiver down her spine. "Sorry about that," he said, his smile disarming. "Where were we?" By the time the dessert menu arrived, Lily was both exhilarated and exhausted. The conversation had drifted into more personal territory, childhood stories, favorite books, dreams they'd abandoned along the way. She found herself telling Justin things she hadn't shared with Owen in years. "You're fascinating," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't say that lightly." Lily laughed, though her heart was pounding. "I think the wine's gone to your head." "Maybe," he said, leaning back with a smirk. "Or maybe I just know brilliance when I see it." When the check came, Justin insisted on paying, waving off her protests with a charming laugh. "You can pick up the next one," he teased, handing his card to the waiter. As they stood to leave, he rested his hand lightly on her lower back, guiding her toward the door. The touch was brief, but it lingered in her mind as they stepped into the cool night air. "Let me walk you to your car," he offered. Lily hesitated but nodded, her breath visible in the crisp air. They strolled in silence, the tension between them palpable. When they reached her car, Justin turned to her, his smile softer now. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "You're remarkable, Lily." Her heart raced as he stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. For a split second, she thought he might kiss her, and part of her didn't know if she'd stop him. But instead, he stepped back, his smile returning. "Drive safe," he said, his voice warm. She nodded, fumbling with her keys as he walked away. The drive home was agonizing. The guilt she had managed to push aside all evening came rushing back, threatening to drown her. She rehearsed what she would say to Owen, how she would act to seem normal. When she walked into the apartment, it was quiet. Owen was sitting on the couch, his laptop open but his gaze distant. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You're late," he said simply. "Sorry," Lily replied, forcing a smile. "The meeting ran longer than I expected." He nodded, his eyes scanning her briefly before returning to his screen. "Did you eat?" she asked, setting her bag down. "I made something earlier," he said, his tone neutral. Lily felt a wave of frustration. Part of her wanted him to question her, to pry, to show any sign of jealousy or suspicion. But instead, he was as calm as ever, his indifference cutting deeper than any argument could. "I'm going to bed," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Good night," he replied without looking up. As Lily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the evening pressed down on her. She thought about Justin's words, his gaze, the way he had made her feel alive again. But the memory of Owen's silence was louder, a deafening reminder of the emptiness that had driven her to this point. For the first time, she wondered if the marriage she was trying so hard to save was already beyond repair. Lily woke up to an empty bed. The faint sound of clinking dishes drifted in from the kitchen, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that everything was normal. But the memory of the night before hung heavy in the air, a smothering fog she couldn't shake. She pulled on her robe and made her way to the kitchen, where Owen was rinsing his coffee mug. His back was to her, his posture unusually rigid. Something about the way he moved set her on edge. "Morning," she said cautiously. Owen didn't respond right away. He set the mug in the drying rack and turned, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said flatly, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Lily forced a smile, trying to diffuse it. "Did you sleep okay?" "Not really," Owen said, crossing his arms. "I did a lot of thinking." Lily's stomach clenched. About what? He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. About us. About this mess. Her heart dropped. Owen, what are you talking about? He looked at her, then really looked at her, and the anger in his eyes made her take a step back. Do you think I'm stupid, Lily? The question hit her like a slap. What? No, of course not. Then stop treating me like I am, he snapped, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. You think I haven't noticed? The late nights, the way you talk about Daniel, the way you've been throwing yourself into whatever little game you're playing? I see it all. Lily's face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. I'm not playing a game, she said defensively. I needed to feel like I mattered. Mattered? Owen's laugh was bitter, cutting. You want to matter by flirting with other men? By humiliating me? Do you know how that feels, Lily? To watch your wife go out of her way to make me look like a fool? Her breath caught in her throat. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. Don't lie to me, he interrupted, his voice rising. You've been trying to provoke me for weeks. And you know what? It worked. I'm provoked. I'm hurt. I'm done. The words hung in the air, each one hitting Lily like a punch to the gut. Done, she whispered, her voice trembling. Owen nodded, his jaw clenched. I've put up with this for long enough. I've tried to be patient, to give you space, to let you work through whatever's going on. But I can't keep doing this. I won't. Lily felt the room spinning. You're overreacting, she said desperately. We're just going through a rough patch. We can fix this. Can we? Owen shot back, his eyes narrowing. Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like you want to fix anything. It looks like you want to punish me. That's not true, she said, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted you to notice me. I did notice, he said quietly. I noticed everything. And all it showed me is that you don't respect me. You don't respect our marriage. Lily's legs felt like jelly. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Owen, please, she begged. We can talk about this. We can fix it. Owen shook his head. I've been trying to fix it, Lily. But you don't want me. You want someone I can't be. You've made that perfectly clear. The conversation was a blur after that. Lily tried to explain, to apologize, to plead, but Owen was resolute. He packed a bag that same morning, his movements mechanical and efficient. Where are you going? She asked, her voice cracking. To a friend's place, he said, his tone devoid of emotion. I'll be back to get the rest of my things later. The sight of him walking out the door was surreal, like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him stay, but all she could do was stand there, frozen, as the door closed behind him. Days passed in a haze. Lily went through the motions at work, plastering on a smile and pretending everything was fine. But the empty apartment was a constant reminder of what she had lost. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Daniel, Justin, and even Claire, all asking if she was okay. She ignored them all, unable to face the questions she knew were coming. Late one night, as she sat on the couch staring at the empty spot where Owen's laptop used to sit, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Owen. I'll be by tomorrow to get my things. Let me know if there's a time that works for you. The formality of the message felt like a dagger to the heart. She stared at the screen, willing herself to respond, but the words wouldn't come. When Owen arrived the next day, he was distant but polite. He packed his things quickly, avoiding eye contact as much as possible. Do you have to do this? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Owen paused, his hands gripping the edge of a box. I've made my decision, Lily. This isn't healthy for either of us. I love you, she said desperately. Doesn't that mean anything? He looked at her then, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Love isn't enough when there's no trust. And I can't trust you anymore. The finality in his tone shattered her. She watched helplessly as he carried the last box out the door, leaving her standing in the empty apartment that now felt like a tomb. In the weeks that followed, Lily replayed every moment in her mind, searching for the point of no return. She thought about the flirtations, the games, the way she had tried to manipulate Owen into feeling something, anything. She had wanted him to fight for her, but instead, she had pushed him away. The humiliation of it all was overwhelming. She had gambled with her marriage, thinking she could control the outcome, and she had lost. Now, all she was left with was regret and the deafening silence of an empty home. Owen's absence was a constant ache, a reminder of the life she had destroyed. And as much as she wanted to blame him, she couldn't escape the truth, she had done this to herself. The sound of the gavel felt like a gunshot, reverberating through Lily's chest. The judge's words blurred in her ears, but the finality was unmistakable, her marriage to Owen was officially over. She sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding as she tried to process the reality. Do you understand, Mrs. Clark? The judge asked, her voice cutting through the haze. Lily nodded stiffly, her throat too tight to speak. Mrs. Clark. The title no longer felt like hers. She was Lily again, just Lily. Alone. The weeks leading up to the hearing had been a chaotic mix of desperate attempts and humiliating realizations. When Owen served her the divorce papers, she had been so sure she could change his mind. She had shown up at his temporary apartment unannounced, clutching a box of mementos from their life together. Photos, letters, and trinkets that had once symbolized their love. Owen, please, she had said, her voice trembling. We can fix this. We can start over. He had looked at the box, his expression softening for a brief moment, but then he shook his head. It's too late, Lily. We've both done too much damage. She had tried everything after that. Counseling sessions he refused to attend, heartfelt letters he never replied to, even leaving messages on his voicemail late at night, her voice cracking with emotion. But Owen remained firm, his resolve unshaken. The humiliation reached its peak when she showed up at his office one afternoon, hoping to catch him during his lunch break. She was greeted by a sympathetic receptionist who informed her that Owen had already left. For lunch? Lily asked, her voice tinged with desperation. The receptionist hesitated, her expression unreadable. No, I believe he left with someone earlier. Lily's stomach churned. She didn't have to ask who it was. She had seen the pictures on social media, Owen smiling at a work event, a pretty blonde standing just a little too close. Claire had gently mentioned it to her, trying to soften the blow, but seeing it in person was different. It was a knife to the gut. In the courtroom, Owen avoided her gaze. He sat across the room, his posture stiff but composed, as if he were bracing himself for impact. When the judge pronounced their divorce final, he simply nodded, his face unreadable. Lily felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She wouldn't cry here. Not now. Not in front of him. As they left the courthouse, Owen walked ahead, his long strides carrying him toward the exit. Lily quickened her pace, her heels clicking loudly against the marble floor. Owen, she called, her voice echoing in the hallway. He stopped, but didn't turn around. She caught up to him, her breath hitching as she stood just a few feet away. Do you hate me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen turned to face her then, his eyes soft but distant. No, Lily. I don't hate you. But I can't do this anymore. I can't be the person you wanted me to be, and I can't keep pretending that this marriage can be fixed. Her shoulders sagged, the weight of his words pressing down on her. I just wanted us to be happy again, she said, tears spilling freely now. I know, he said gently. But sometimes love isn't enough. With that, he walked away, leaving Lily standing alone in the empty hallway. That night, Lily sat on the floor of her apartment, the box of mementos still untouched beside her. She picked up a photo of them from their honeymoon, Owen laughing as she held an ice cream cone to his lips. The happiness in his eyes felt like a distant memory, a ghost of the life they had shared. She had lost him. Not because of the flirting, the jealousy games, or even the fights. She had lost him because she hadn't realized how far apart they had drifted until it was too late. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry, not out of desperation or humiliation, but out of grief. Grief for the love they had once shared, and for the life they had built together that was now gone. As the tears fell, she made a quiet promise to herself, to rebuild, to heal, and to learn from the mistakes that had cost her everything. But tonight, she would let herself mourn. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The apartment was suffocatingly silent. Lily sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the box of mementos she still hadn't opened. The walls felt like they were closing in, but she didn't have the energy to leave. It had been 3 months since the divorce was finalized, and her life had unraveled piece by piece ever since. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen, seeing Claire's name. The sight made her stomach twist. She hadn't spoken to Claire in weeks, not since their last strained conversation when Claire had told her the truth she didn't want to hear. You pushed him too far, Lily, Claire had said bluntly. You wanted him to react, and he finally did, by leaving. I warned you this would happen. Lily hadn't replied. She couldn't. What was there to say? Claire was right, and now, even she had distanced herself. The silence from her friends wasn't intentional, but it was telling. Their sympathy had run dry, replaced by quiet judgment and discomfort around her increasingly erratic behavior. Her resignation letter had been equally impulsive. She'd walked into Justin's office one morning, exhausted from the weight of her crumbling life, and handed it over without explanation. Lily, wait, Justin had said, his brow furrowed. You don't have to do this. You're one of the best we have. I can't stay here, she had replied, her voice hollow. I need a change. He nodded reluctantly, but there was no disguising the disappointment in his eyes. She left that day, walking out of the building she had once thought of as her second home, and felt nothing but emptiness. The bills began to pile up. Without a job, her savings dwindled quickly, forcing her to move to a smaller, dingier apartment. The stark contrast from the life she'd shared with Owen was humiliating. There were no soft carpets or cozy kitchen nooks here, only peeling wallpaper and the sound of her neighbors' arguments bleeding through the thin walls. Every time she logged onto social media, she saw Owen moving forward. Pictures of him at work events, smiling with colleagues, and, most painfully, standing beside the blonde she had once dismissed as harmless. They weren't overtly romantic photos, but the implication was there. He was happy. He was healing. And she was stuck. One evening, she found herself walking through the park near her old apartment, drawn by nostalgia and a longing she couldn't shake. She passed the bench where she and Owen used to sit and share coffee on lazy Sunday mornings. She could almost hear his laughter, see the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The memory was a dagger to her chest. A group of friends walked by, their laughter ringing out, and she felt a pang of envy. She had isolated herself so completely that now, even the thought of reaching out felt insurmountable. The bridge between her and her old life had burned to ashes, and she had been the one holding the match. The turning point came one night when she hit rock bottom. She had spent the entire day in bed, the curtains drawn, and the emptiness of her apartment pressing down on her. The silence was unbearable, and for the first time, she allowed herself to say it out loud, "This is my fault." The words hung in the air, their truth undeniable. She had spent so much time blaming Owen, her friends, her coworkers, but the reality was inescapable. Her attempts to control, to manipulate, to provoke, they had all backfired. She had driven away the people who loved her because she couldn't face her own insecurities. The next morning, she pulled herself out of bed and made a list. It was a small step, but it was something. At the top, she wrote, "Find a job," followed by, "Apologize to Claire," and finally, "Forgive yourself." The last item felt impossible, but she knew it was necessary. If she couldn't move past her mistakes, she would never move forward. She started with Claire, sending a heartfelt message that began with, "I'm sorry," and ended with, "I miss you." The response didn't come immediately, but when it did, it was a cautious olive branch. Months later, Lily stood in the small coffee shop where she now worked, pouring lattes and greeting customers with a smile that, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel forced. It wasn't the glamorous career she had once dreamed of, but it was honest. It was a start. One afternoon, as she wiped down the counter, a familiar face walked in. Owen. Her breath caught as he approached the counter, his expression unreadable. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied, her voice steady. They exchanged pleasantries, and when he left, she felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. He was moving on, and now, so was she.